This edition of MacVoices is supported by Lightstream. Low rates, great service, lending uncomplicated. Get a debt consolidation loan from 5.85% APR with AutoPay and a special listener discount at lightstream.com/MacVoices. MacVoices is supported by ATTO, the power behind the storage, providing network and storage connectivity for Mac users for more than 30 years. Visit atto.com to learn more. Welcome to MacVoices. This is the talk of the Apple community, and I'm Chuck Joyner. And folks, it's always a pleasure when I get to have our guest on today because he's not on as much as I'd like, but, I try to cut him a little bit of slack and let him have some time off. Mr. Ted Landau is here. Ted, it's great to see you.
Thank you. And as always, it's great to be back. Yes, I'm busy being retired and having fun, and it's taking up a lot of my time. Yeah.
You're one of those guys that you retired and now you have no idea how you ever had time to work, right?
Yeah, I'm very busy, actually. Not doing any of the traditional work, but busy doing things both for my personal enjoyment and for helping out and volunteering in various ways. Yeah, so
that's
keeping me busy.
Whatever makes you happy. Whatever makes you happy. But you've consented to come back, and we have a couple subjects today. We hope to get to all of them. The first one, though, is home theater. And we've been planning to do this for a little while, that you made some adjustments or upgrades, whatever, to your home theater. I'm anxious to hear a little bit more about them, especially since this is the holiday buying season and everything is on sale.
Well, sure, I'll be happy to do it. What I wound up getting, let me say at the outset, is not the economy version. If somebody's looking for something that would be a few $100s to upgrade their system, if you're looking for a sound bar to add to your TV because you don't like the built-in sound of your TV, which I would entirely understand, and I would highly recommend getting a sound bar if that was the case, that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about my dedicated home theater system, which was considerably more upscale than that, and I decided to go even more upscale this time around. So I won't tell you the final amount of money that I spent, but I think your listeners will be able to discern it just from checking, if they wanted to, what these things cost. So,
okay, sounds intriguing.
What got me started on why this year, why now? I had been debating getting a new TV. It started with the TV. I had a Panasonic TV. I'm blanking on words here already. Not the LED, the other type. So yes, it started with the TV. I had a Panasonic 60-inch plasma TV, which I absolutely loved. I came to appreciate why plasma TVs were so much more popular among people who cared about picture quality anyway than the LCDs and LEDs. But I had come to the point where I decided I wanted to get 4K. And of course, as you probably know, there are no 4K plasmas. In fact, there aren't even any plasmas anymore. They stopped. I think the year that I got, which was 2013, the year I got that Panasonic, was the last year that Panasonic made any plasmas at all, and they're gone. So I decided I would get a 4K at some point, and I kept waiting for the right time, and I finally decided that the market had gotten stabilized enough and the prices had come down enough that now it looked good, and I was going to move into getting one. But the problem was, and this is where it got to the whole overhaul, I soon discovered, probably knew it all along, but it became clear that the setup that I have is a TV with an integrated AV receiver. I had a Denon receiver and a sound surround system of speakers. The receiver is itself several years old, and it predates 4K, and there was no way to pass through 4K to a TV from that receiver, so I was going to have to update the receiver and get a new receiver as well if I wanted to have my system truly 4K. And at that point, I started then finally, I said, well, I'm getting a new receiver. I looked at the speakers. The speakers that I had were by far the oldest component in the system, probably one of the older pieces of equipment that plug into electrical that are in any way electrical. Actually, they don't, except for the subwoofer, they don't plug into an outlet. But they were about 20 years old. I got them, I think, sometime in the 1990s. They're Polk sound surround system, a good one at the time. Nothing great. It was the 4 mini speakers for surround sound, a larger center channel speaker, and a subwoofer to bring in the bass. And it served well, but I decided now is going to be the time that I would upgrade that as well. So then I started looking at speakers. And I decided that I was, for the first time in my life, really, going to get speakers that were not, in which the cost wasn't going to be the primary consideration. And so I started looking at more expensive floor standing full speakers. And that's actually where I started my search by that point. And that took a while. And so it turns out, as anyone who's looked at these speakers probably knows, that there are at least a dozen different brands of speakers that get good ratings. And that trying to, unlike some components, there's a lot of personal preference to speakers. How they sound to you may sound somewhat different to somebody else. What you want from speakers may be somewhat different than what somebody wants from speakers. And so it isn't as easy as just going to Wirecutter and saying what are the best speakers and say, oh yes, this is the top brand, that's what's going to work. And so it took me quite a while just to figure out what speakers I wanted. And I wound up getting Definitive Technology, DefTech speakers, the 940, 9040 or the 940, I think it's 9040, I'm not sure, model. I like them very much. They got into whole issues of different types of speakers, and these have these are the I forget again the exact term, but the reflective back speaker, where sound goes to the back wall and reflects back as well as coming out of the front of the speaker. And some people like that, some people didn't. I sort of liked it. It makes it a little bit harder to localize where the sound is coming from, but it gives a richer sound. And by the way, I started learning about how do I know that that's the difference, you might ask? Did I really study it all that closely? Well, a little bit. I listened to them in stores, but also I spent a lot of time on this thing we talked about briefly last time, I think, when I just mentioned it, the avsforum.com. And that is where anybody who wants to know anything about audiovisual equipment should go, unless they are worried that they're going to learn more than they care to learn, which is a little bit what happened to me. You can go down a rabbit hole where nothing seems good enough, because no matter what you think you're going to get, that you'll find 20 people there telling you why something else is a better choice, and go into great detail as to exactly why, and often go into things that I only dimly understood at the time at first. Anyway, I did get those speakers. I like them for a couple of reasons, aside from the decent sound. I was a little bit space constrained where my home theater was, and so I couldn't get speakers that were very wide. They had to be pretty narrow and tall, and the DefTech speakers were exactly that. They also had a quite cool design. At this point, I decided I was going to start worrying about Dolby Atmos, which I'm still not sure was something that was important. Again, your listeners may know that Dolby Atmos is a sound enhancement where you can hear sound coming from the ceiling. The ideal way to have Dolby Atmos is to actually have the speakers installed in the ceiling, which I wasn't going to do. But the second way to do it, which apparently works pretty well, is to have speakers that sit about where your TV is, and then they actually fire the sound up to the ceiling, and it triangulates back down to about where you're sitting. And so it seems like it's coming from the ceiling because of the bank shot effect of the sound. And the DefTech speakers had a very nice integrated way of doing that, where the Dolby Atmos component sits on top of the actual speaker and attaches to it in such a way that it draws power from the speaker itself, which why you have to draw power I'll get to in a second. But essentially, you don't have to separately plug anything into the wall to get the Dolby Atmos speakers to work, or even actually you don't even have to separately Well, you actually do. I take that, but it's quite simple. The way that it works compared to a system in which you had to locate the Dolby Atmos speakers someplace other than on top of the speaker and not have it essentially lock into the Dolby to the DefTech lower speaker. The biggest issue, without spending too much more time on the speakers, the biggest issue was that the DefTech speaker was designed so that the woofer of the speaker served as a subwoofer if you wanted it to. You could actually hook it up to the subwoofer input of the receiver through the LFE connection and have it work directly as a subwoofer. There was a lot of discussion on the AVS forum of the pros and cons of doing that, and some people claim it's never going to work as good as a true subwoofer. And even if you get these speakers, which were good speakers by everyone's assessment, you should still get a separate subwoofer, or you won't be happy if you really want that booming sound from movies when things explode and stuff like that. I didn't want to have to get a separate subwoofer at that point because I told it I was already kind of space constrained, and I was hoping that the built-in subwoofer would at least be satisfactory for me, and it has been. It is better than the subwoofer. It sounds more of a subwoofer effect than the subwoofer that I had before. So it's quite effective, I think. But again, that got into a whole issue then of how to adjust it. I say this because part of what we talked about last time is the ongoing process of going through all these nuances that I didn't even know were issues until I started getting into this. It turns out that when you get the speaker system, and the next thing that I got, I guess, was I should get into is I simply got an upgrade to my Denon receiver. I got the newest version, so to speak, of the Denon receiver that I'd already bought years ago. So that was a pretty easy choice. And what then you have to do is adjust the speakers, the sound system, so that you're balancing out the speakers and achieving the maximum surround effect and so on. And there's a whole way of doing that involves hooking up a microphone and running the software that the Denon receiver comes with that then allows the microphone to get sound from all the different speakers and adjust the levels for each one, which it didn't do a perfect job ever in my case anyway. And part of the issue when you go through setting up these speakers is it will ask you what size speakers you have. Are they small, medium, large? And depending upon what type of speaker you say you have, it will do different things. And then there was an issue of, well, what do you say these DefTech speakers are? Because technically speaking, they're large speakers, but if you're counting the woofer as the subwoofer, maybe they're small speakers. And there were various recommendations as to how to do these things. And it was enough to drive me crazy after a while, but I put up with it because that's my nature, to worry about all these things, unfortunately. But it was quite time consuming to try to get the sound the way I wanted, and I think it's pretty much there now. I still have some. I think the sound will never be perfect because I don't have a room that's designed to have perfect sound. I don't have. It's not a four-wall enclosed space. It's more open than that, and not ideal for a home theater in that regard. But I got it about as good as I could. The other issue that came up when all this was happening was that the number of times I had to return things, I feel like I must be the unluckiest person to have ever gone through this process. But the first receiver that I got was defective in the sense that every once in a while there was no sound at all, which I ascertained was due to the receiver. And then the sound would suddenly come back. And so one of the times it happened, I kept turning up the volume because there was no sound at all. And then the sound suddenly came back and blew the center channel speaker. So now not only did I have to replace the receiver, but I had to replace the center channel speaker. And then there was an issue of whether a blown speaker was covered on their return policy or not. We had to argue about that for a while. Eventually I did get everything replaced and working. So at that point, I now had a sound system and receiver ready for a 4K television, and I was ready to move on that. And that decision was relatively easy. I decided beyond any doubt that I was going to get the LG OLED TV. The only problem there that was coming up is that the 2019 model was just about to come out. As I was making the decision, I had to decide that I want to wait for 2019, pay the increased price of getting the 2019 when it was brand new. I ultimately got the 2018 and then returned that, even though it was working fine, because the 2019 dropped in price a few months after it came out to the point where it wasn't worth the price reduction I got for the 2018. Luckily, I'd gotten it from Costco, which had a 90-day return policy. So I was able to return the 2018, got the 2019, which I'm happy with. And I can tell you, beyond any doubt, if anybody's considering getting a new TV, these OLED TVs are outstanding. I still, even to this day, just sometimes turn on the TV and my jaw drops with the quality of the picture. It's that outstanding. And when you combine the OLED technology, which is this dead black technology where there's no bleeding of light. When something's supposed to be black, it's actually pitch black, unlike LED TVs. And you combine that with the HDR, high dynamic range, and the 4K, you get a picture that is truly stunning. And I also can tell you that the price continues to drop. The TV that I got, the 65-inch C9, was $3,500 the day that it went on sale. I now saw on Amazon and at Costco that you can get the TV for $2,000, $2,050, I think, just a little over $2,000. So it's like a $1,500 drop in price. If you're willing to spend $2,000 on a TV, you will not be sorry if you get this one. So that's for sure. The final thing, I will say without going into detail, because I can see you're drifting off here already. But just like for the sound system, you go back to the AVS forum, and there's a whole host of things in terms of calibrating the TV. So that you don't. We talked about Black Crush on our last time together. I won't go through it again, but that was one of many issues that came up. The issue of the soap opera effect, and how to get rid of it if you don't like it, which I don't like, and motion issues and whether the motion is blurry or not, and getting the color balance correct and so on. And you can spend some people hire people they pay hundreds of dollars to have people come and professionally calibrate their TV so that the picture is just the way they want. And other people, I think, just don't care and have a crappy picture if they're not making any effort at all. But I think with some minimal of effort, you can really, I found that without spending too much time on worrying about this, I was able to get a picture that I was very happy with. But it does pay to read some stuff to put you on the right track. You're not going to get a great picture just by guessing at how to do it. You do need if you're not going to read up some stuff, you do need to get somebody, I think, to help you. When that was all done, the final thing that I needed, it turned out, was I was going to mount it on the wall. And I needed, for the first time, to get a wall mount that allowed the TV to come out from the wall as opposed to one that stayed on the wall. Because the speakers were so close to the TV, and these were floor-standing speakers, I said, that went up almost as high as the top of the TV, that if you were seated much to the left or much to the right of the TV itself, which sometimes happens when we have company come over, that the speaker blocked the view of the TV unless I could pull the TV out from the wall. And so I wound up spending some time now researching again what sort of mount to get. And I wound up getting a Canto mount, which I was quite happy with, except I wound up getting into a big hassle with the Best Buy Geek Squad installers, because the Canto mount said that what happened was when I was done, the TV was fine when it was pulled out to where I was mostly going to keep it. But if I decided I wanted to move it back to the wall, as I moved it back to the wall, it drifted off to the right, so that the TV was actually, the right side of the TV was behind one of the speakers when it was against the wall, making it essentially useless. And they couldn't move where the mount was on the wall very easily. But I had read when I bought this mount, was one of the reasons I bought it, that you can slide part of the hardware that's included with the mount, so that even though you're not moving the part of the mount that's attached to the wall, you can slide something over to avoid that problem, so that it will be centered anyway. It'll be off center compared to the hardware that's on the wall, but you won't notice that. And I said, yeah, do that. And they said, no, you can't do that. They argued with me and said I was wrong. And eventually, after 2 times of arguing about this, I said, no, I'm sure I'm right. They refused to come because they just said I was wrong. And I had to go to the store and argue with the manager of the store. And they eventually sent somebody else out who did what I wanted in 10 minutes and got it working. Indeed, I was right, which I knew that I was, and they apologized, but that took weeks to resolve. And after all that was over, finally I had this new system. So it took me from when I first started looking to when the mount situation was finally resolved was about 6 months. So this was a long process, and lots of money. And lots of effort trying to figure out how to set these things up so the sound was right and the picture was right. It wasn't something that I enjoyed a lot during the time, but I'm very happy with the end result. So there you have it. That's the long story.
The holidays are here, and that means you're probably giving your credit cards a workout. But the bills come due in January, and that's why you should look at Lightstream to refinance your credit card balances. With Lightstream, a simple online application that you can do on your phone can get you a consolidation loan from $5,000 to $100,000 and maybe even get you the money the same day. During and after that process, you'll notice that there are no fees. No application fees, no origination fees, no transaction fees, and no prepayment penalties. With Lightstream, there are no surprises, just the loan you want. Lightstream knows that when you have good credit, you deserve a low rate and great service. And they deliver. Credit cards are part of the convenience of modern life. Lightstream makes them even more convenient by giving you a low APR, auto pay, and a way to simplify all your balances into one place, just for MacVoices viewers and listeners. Apply now to get an additional interest rate discount. The only way to get this discount is to go to lightstream.com/MacVoices. That's lightstream.com/MacVoices for an additional discount. LIGHTSTREAM lightstream.com/MacVoices. Subject to credit approval, rate includes 0.0% autopay discount, terms and conditions apply, and offers are subject to change without notice. Visit lightstream.com/MacVoices for more information. Thanks to Lightstream for their support of MacVoices. Okay, so just a couple things I have to ask. First of all, if you will, send me model numbers for everything you can send me model numbers for, because that would just save us both a bunch of emails.
Okay.
But Ted, what are you using to drive the content? I would think that somewhere there had to be either a Blu-ray player or one of the various media boxes.
Yes.
I would guess there's an Apple TV in there, but I'm not sure.
Yes. Well, those are things I had that I didn't update. I have a TiVo, which is connected to my Comcast. I have essentially a TiVo box that draws its information from Comcast, and that's where I get my TV from. It is a 1080p box. It's not 4K yet, which I'm relatively okay with because really there's very little over-the-air 4K television anyway, and so that's worked out fine. And then I have a 4K Apple TV. And that's where I get most of the Apple TV content from. The TV itself also is a smart TV, and you can get the LG TV comes with Netflix and Amazon. And I just saw they just had an update the other day. It was quite cool. The LG software just updated and now has a Disney Plus channel as well. So the just initiated Disney Plus streaming channel I can get through my LG TV. And so between of course the LG TV channels are all 4K HDR. They're beautiful. So I can either use the LG TV itself, the Apple TV, which is 4K, or the TiVo system. And I do have a Blu-ray player. I have not gotten a 4K Blu-ray player. I've thought about doing that, but really, and again, you read people say, well, that 4K Blu-ray players, the 4K is actually better than over-the-air 4K because the density of the data is higher. But I'm just not into buying my fifth version. After getting the VHS tape and the DVD and the Blu-ray disc and the streaming version, I'm not into having to worry about yet a fifth different variation of Star Wars. So I'm pretty happy with I buy things if I don't want to rent them. I'll buy things on iTunes or Amazon Prime and play the streaming 4K version, and that's been good enough for me. And the point of fact is, I almost never, except on a few occasions that my wife rents something from the library and gets a DVD or occasionally a Blu-ray disc from the library. Everything I watch is either live or streaming.
Okay. That's yeah, I almost forgot. Did you do anything special with any of the remotes, like any of the learning remotes, or did you just go with what came with the devices?
Yes, I have had the Logitech 640 or something like that. I forget the exact model number, but it's a relatively low-end one. It has the LCD screen, but it isn't one of the super fancy ones, and I've been very happy with it. I went through a process a couple of years ago, which I somewhat facetiously referred to as the grand unification. We have 3 TVs in our house. There's the home theater, which I've been talking about, and then we have a smaller TV that we keep in our living room, dining room areas, which is a flight up so that we can watch TV without having to go downstairs. And then we have a small TV in our bedroom for when we want to watch TV when we're in bed. And at one point, when I had them all set up, each one was totally separate and different. The remotes were different. The TiVos were slightly different. Everything seemed different, and it drove me a little bit crazy, but it drove my wife especially crazy because whatever she would say, "How do I do this here?" And I said, "No, well, you're trying to do it the way you do it downstairs. You have to do it differently upstairs." And she said, I don't want to have, I don't have to read through a 400-page manual just to figure out how to turn on the TV. And so I said, okay, we're going to solve this problem. And I wound up involved some hardware purchases, including getting TiVo minis to go with the basic TV unit, and a couple of other things. But and getting these Logitech remotes, we now have 3 of them, one in each of those 3 locations. And the end result is, at least from my wife's point of view, and from the end user's point of view, everything now works the same. Whatever you do in one room to turn on the TV, you do the same thing in every room, and everything seems transparently, even though behind the scenes is more complicated than that, but everything seems transparently to be the same. And so that's why I called it the grand unification, because I unified the way everything worked. And so I've been very happy with those remotes. The one thing that has caused problems with the remotes now, which I'm not sure what the solution is, and has led me to use other remotes more frequently now, is voice activation. The TiVo is wonderful with voice activation. Like, for instance, you can just say skip ahead 15 minutes, and the TiVo will skip ahead of a recording, assuming you're using a recording here. And the TiVo will, within a fraction of a second, skip ahead 15 minutes. It's great during, like, when I'm watching basketball games. I can say skip ahead 15 minutes during halftime, and then I've just skipped the whole halftime, and I'm ready to start the third quarter or something like that. But the problem is, of course, the Logitech remote doesn't have a microphone button. So anytime I want to use the microphone, I have to get the TiVo remote out. And the same thing for the Apple TV. The Apple TV increasingly uses the microphone for all sorts of things. You can search with giving the search box instructions via the microphone and so on. And again, I have to get the Apple TV remote out if I want to do that. So it would be nice if there was something like the Logitech that had a built-in microphone button that would then work with all those different microphone technologies, but I don't see that coming anytime soon.
And there's no way to map that to another button? I mean, because certainly the Logitech remotes have plenty of buttons.
Yeah, but it has to have the Logitech itself doesn't have a microphone. It has to have a
Oh,
microphone.
that's right. Yeah. Okay. Oh, gee.
It's not a question of a button. It's a question of there's no physical microphone.
Right. Okay. All right. Wow, that's quite the adventure, and it's always disappointing to hear that the providers of some of this equipment don't stand behind it the way you would like to, especially when you start talking about the higher end stuff, but also the Geek Squad. I mean, they can't be experts in everything. I get that, but you would think that especially if somebody is able to say this is what it should do, and by the way, here's the documentation that says it should do it, that they could figure out somebody or find somebody to do it. So
yeah, and I don't know. I mean, the Geek Squad actually, even though I had a lot of hesitation about them, was actually quite decent overall. I used them for a couple of other things too, and that was the one thing where things went sideways. So I don't want to make it sound like they were totally incompetent, but they claim that this was not a mount that they typically installed. It wasn't one that was stocked in the store. I had to have it mail ordered from Best Buy, but still mail ordered, and they weren't familiar with it. But the thing was, they didn't want to learn to be familiar with it, and they were very dismissive of the fact that I was saying that the manual says there's a different way to do this. So.
Yeah. So I want to make sure I have it right. So you have left, right, center channel. You have two left, right, rear speakers. You did not get the sub.
I did not get the sub because the sub is built in, so I have sub connections. But
that's right.
And I got these two Dolby Atmos modules as well. So it's what's called a 7.2 system.
Okay. So those are the ones that fire at the ceiling.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. All right.
And I also learned that that even though my surround speakers are rear, they now recommend, which is I think what they which is I think what they recommended. It went back years ago when I first got surround. So now they're saying ideally, if you're only going to have two rear speakers, they should be like facing on the sides, facing your left ear and your right ear rather than behind. And I can't do that because of the way my room is constructed. So. That was that.
Yeah, I started down the home theater route a while back, and for better or worse, I stopped because what I foresaw was something like what you went through, and constantly chasing it. And I also had to take a good hard look at how much time I really spent in a home theater situation. Mm-hmm. And what I ended up with, I wanted something that sounded okay or sounded good, that I could really enjoy, but that I didn't have to geek with too much, because frankly, sometimes you just don't have the time. So I ended up with going with the Sonos solutions. I had been, and again, this is a few years ago, back when the options were completely different. But I got left and right Sonos Play 3s. I got Play 1s for the rear left and right. I did get the soundbar / center channel setup that they have. That, frankly, I was skeptical about that and how much dispersion it would give, and it does pretty nice. I mean, it really does. Let's see, and I got the sub, and so for better or worse, there are not a lot of adjustments you can make to it, but at the end of the day, it sounds pretty darn good. And it sounds like your room is kind of like mine. It's not really set up to be a home theater. And so if I'm going to try to do any compensating for it, it's going to have to be very technical and very involved. And so I went through a few of the exercises and got it tuned as well as it's going to be tuned for that particular room. But I've been very happy with it. It'd be interesting for us to compare dollars, because Sonos gear is not real cheap. And that's no criticism or anything like that. It's the way it is, because it's high quality gear. Don't think it's as high quality as what you have. So yeah, it's great if you have the time and want to play with this stuff. And you're right, the AV forums will drive you a little bit crazy, because they will tell you and show you that you have problems that you didn't know you had and had never even noticed. And then
exactly
you can't,
right.
Yeah, then you can't unsee them or unhear them.
It's like going to WebMD and discovering that itch you thought you had could be, some fatal infection or something like that. You thought it was just an itch, but it turns out you could die from it tomorrow. Of course, you're probably not going to die from it tomorrow, but they'll make you worry about it. That's exactly what it's like. Yes.
Yeah.
And in reference to what you're saying, I mean, I agree with you. There are all sorts of levels of good, and anything that you do will probably be 100 times better than just the built-in sound from the TV. And there are people that are content with the built-in sound of the TV, for that matter. So it's not that these other solutions are not good. And I imagine there is a degree of overkill at some point too, where it's probably better than it has to be for most people's uses. But I can tell you, the system that I got is especially good for music. I use it both for music and home theater. And when you're playing music, it makes a tremendous difference to me compared to the system that I had, which was pretty much not very good for music. I mean, the straight stereo, as a straight stereo system, not a surround system, it is amazing. And I think you would tell the difference instantly from what you have. As a surround system, they're probably comparable. The one difference I would probably guess is that when I crank up the volume, it makes a difference. I mean, if I want to, if you ever go to a movie theater and you're sitting in the movie theater listening to some, action movie, the latest whatever, Star Wars is on my mind now because the new one's coming out next month, and you're saying, why didn't I bring earplugs? I'm going to lose my hearing that this is so loud, and the sound is everywhere. But if you at all like that sort of enveloping, loud, booming sound, I can get that pretty much at home with this system. It sounds, if not as good, maybe better than most movie theaters that I would watch a movie in. And I think lesser systems would be hard to duplicate that. So.
Yeah, and just like we said, I mean, there's so many factors that go into this, but obviously expense, time, sophistication, all those things, because a system like this, I mean, hopefully you won't have too many tweaks to do to it. That, once you set it, with the exception of maybe the adjustments for a particular movie or TV show or whatever, that, you've pretty much got it. But that was the thing that was bugging me, because I know how I am. If I've got all those knobs and buttons and dials to play with, I'm going to play with them, or I'm going to want to know how to play with them. Mm-hmm. And that's just a huge time suck. So, yeah. Yes.
Though I will say, again, you're right in the sense that I spend almost no time now with all that stuff. Having spent months adjusting it and being pretty happy with the result, I now just enjoy the stuff and rarely have to bother with the adjustments. So,
yeah. I just got a call from off screen that the people in the AV forum miss you and want you to come back.
Yes, I don't think they ever liked me. I would ask the dumb questions that they would be like, "Who is this guy and why is he bothering us?"
Well, it sounds like an impressive system. It really does. I'm thank you for sharing it. I have to admit, though, that the DevTech I've not heard of, so I've got to go look those up. So
I hadn't heard of them either until I started looking, and the AV forum people certainly were very laudatory of them, and it's gotten great reviews. But like I said, it was one of maybe a dozen brands that get great reviews, and every one of them had their advocates. I mean, there were people that said, don't get DevTech, get this instead, and people who said get DevTech and don't get that. I mean, it's not something of which speakers more than any other component. It's hard to get a consensus opinion.
Yeah, the last time I went and actively bought like good home stereo speakers was back when they had stereo stores that you'd walk in and there was a small mountain of speakers. You could take your particular piece of music or whatever in and have them play it and switch between different sets. Mm-hmm. And I have to admit the experience was surprising. The difference between, and not just, the $25 speakers versus the $25,000 speakers, mm-hmm. but just the pick a price range and the covering of the music and all that, it really does make a difference. And if you're going to spend that kind of money, you should get a chance to test them out.
Well, I did do that actually. The high end Best Buys. I did spend a lot of time at Best Buy. The high end Best Buy have these Magnolia components for high end audio equipment primarily, and I did spend a lot of time doing the exactly where he switched back and forth between about 3 or 4 different speakers that I was considering, so I could hear how they sounded. It never quite sounds the same in home as it sounds in the store, but at least it gives you an idea of where you're going. And I will also say that you tend, I mean, maybe I'm being a little snobbish here, but I'm sure I am. But you tend to get a little derisive. The degrading of what constitutes good sound compared to years ago, like you're talking about, is really almost sad sometimes. Like I read a review, I think, of the new MacBook Pro 16-inch that just came out. And one of the reviews I read commented on how great the sound was. And maybe, he means how great it is for a laptop speaker, which is pretty crappy as sound goes. But whoever it was pretty much, and I'm thinking, there's no such thing as great sound from a laptop speaker. I mean, it could be better than you're used to from whatever laptop speaker that you had before, but I would never use the word great and laptop speaker in the same sentence. It's the same thing when people talk about whether the Amazon Echo speaker or the Sonos speaker, not the ones that you have, but the Google speaker is better. I mean, they're all fairly not good, but they can all be good enough. But they can all sound wonderful if what you want to do is listen to the latest album from Beyonce or whatever that you wanted to listen to, and it sounds good enough for you to enjoy while you're making dinner. Well, then that's fine. It served its purpose, but it's not great sound. And I think people come to think that is great sound because they don't know better anymore. That's the snobbish part.
I think I read the same review, and we're not going to call out anybody, but I too, I will be fair. I want to go and hear it, but I'm like you. It's like, you need to put a caveat in there because, I'm afraid people are expecting, something akin to the Sonos or whatever. And you're right. You're never going to get that out of a laptop. I mean, there's certain physics of sound involved that are going to require that it's just, or I guess not requires not the right word, but it's just going to be automatically limited. It just can't help it.
Yeah. It can be better than any other laptop speakers you've ever heard. And you can say that, but that's not the same thing as saying it's great sound in some absolute sense, but not worth quibbling about. But that's my take on it.
Well, I'm glad you made it through, and I'm glad you're happy with what you got because it sounded like a bit of a battle. The other thing we wanted to touch on, though, is there anything else on the home theater?
No, I was just going to say yes. I am happy with the result. That's all I was going to say, and I hope I didn't spend too much time going through the minutia of the process that people tuned out and turned on some animated cartoon instead.
Yeah. No, I don't think so, Ted, because anybody that's serious about their home theater setup, I think they're looking for experiences like yours and they want to know. And, we could probably sit here for 3 hours and ask you to get into all the details of why you picked what you picked. But at the end of the day, those were the things that were right for you. And, I would encourage anybody, if you're serious about doing a home theater setup, for heaven's sake, go and audition a lot of gear and talk to some people that know. Maybe don't go quite as far as Ted did unless you really are into it. And then by all means, go and have fun with it.
No, and I would say it isn't necessary. My disparaging comments about laptop speakers aside, it certainly isn't necessary to spend anywhere near the amount of money that I spent to get good sound for a home theater system. I was going Not all out, because I could have spent a lot more money. And it was a whole, and then you're getting me. We're going to spend more time on this. When I was in the Best Buy Magnolia room, they had two rooms to test sound systems, and they took me to one room, and I spent a lot of time there. And at some point, we're walking past the other room, and I said, "Well, what's the other room? How come you never take me in to hear those speakers?" And he said, "Well, those are for the really high end speakers." And the speakers there, that start off at, like, I don't remember, but some of them were as much as $10,000 or $15,000 a speaker, and I said, well, okay, we're in a different price range. I can, for the price of the system that I'd built from that, I could buy, a second home somewhere.
Yeah.
So. Yes, there's no end to how much money you can spend, and at some point it asymptotes out, and the difference between, the difference between some amount and three times that amount may be a 1% difference, and you have to be pretty fussy for that 1% to matter enough that you're willing to spend that much money on it. So there is that. Yes.
Yeah, and now I'm going to do it. Because there's one thing I didn't ask you. Since you were doing a dedicated home theater system, were you running the cables through the walls or some other option?
Yes, I was running the cables through the walls primarily because when we first moved into our home 15 years ago, we remodeled our house considerably, including completely redoing the lower level of the house where the home theater system is. And so they put in new walls, and I took the opportunity to run SoundWire throughout the behind the walls, so I would be able to put the surround speakers without having to run cable externally. So yes, the sound system is entirely cables in the walls, and then also for the mounted television, that's pretty simple to do. Actually, you can almost do it yourself if you're a little bit do it yourself, or in order not to see the cables from that run from the receiver to the TV, you just have to do one of these things where you get a low voltage system that you run up to the that you run up behind the TV. And so essentially there's wires that are, there's a sort of outlet thing behind the TV where the wires are, and it runs behind the wall and comes out just like 3 feet down from where it started from. So it's not a very long distance to go, and then you can't see the wires. So.
Right. And that was one of the deciding factors when I went with the Sonos, is other than plugging in the speakers to electricity, you have no wires, no cables at all, just the cable that connects the center channel to the TV. So that, again, just depends on your setup, and that's just one more factor. But yeah, with what you were talking about, it had to be, hiding the cables, or your wife would have killed you.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which didn't happen.
Well, obviously, I'm glad. And all the wounds have healed, even. This edition of MacVoices is supported by ATTO Technology, the power behind the storage. ATTO Technology is celebrating over 30 years in the Mac industry, providing connectivity choices of all flavors for all kinds of storage for all kinds of industries. Some of the biggest names in the entertainment industry rely on ATTO solutions. Names like ABC, CNN, Disney, Pixar, and Skywalker Sound. But they aren't alone. AT&T, FedEx, Lockheed Martin, and Starbucks also use ATTO products to do what they do. And that's why you should select ATTO products to do what you do. ATTO has solutions no matter what Mac you use. From the portability of the MacBook Air to the heavy firepower of the Mac Pro, ATTO is there with low latency, highly optimized Thunderbolt and PCIe options. Visit ATTO at atto.com right now and find out how their solutions can be the answer to your problems. That's ATTO.com, atto.com. And a big thanks to ATTO for supporting MacVoices. Ted, the other thing we wanted to talk a little bit about is you've been doing some thinking and some observing of the Macintosh as the evolution here is proceeding. And I was really anxious to hear what your perspective is on the keyboards and the new 16-inch MacBook Pro and the new Mac Pro and everything.
Chuck, the clock on the wall says we're running out of time to talk about all the things that we were going to talk about. And where does the time go? Well, it went to me spending an unending amount of time detailing all the little things that I did for my home theater system. So I think we're probably better off if we save that for another occasion. We'll meet again and do that. But there is one thing that has come up in the last couple of days that I do want to mention, and that has to do with backing up your Mac. And I use SuperDuper to back up my Mac. I like having a mirrored backup copy, which is what SuperDuper does, as opposed to just Time Machine, because I like having something that I could actually boot from it if my hard drive for my internal Mac failed. Without getting into all the details of that, suffice it to say that I haven't updated to Catalina yet on my main Mac. I have on my laptop. And part of the reason was I just wanted to wait to see what issues that might crop up that would cause problems for me for my main system. I'm pretty conservative about the main system. And the other day I happened to look at SuperDuper's website to see whether the latest version of SuperDuper worked with Catalina or not. And it's still in beta. I think Carbon Copy Clone already has a non-beta version out, but SuperDuper is still working with beta. And part of the reason that they're having problems with it has to do with changes that Catalina introduced. And the SuperDuper website has a very good historical look at how the macOS operating system has changed over the years in terms of these issues that would affect backing up. And I'll send you the link. I think it's worth taking a look at. But the biggest thing, which I didn't even know until I started looking at this, maybe other people knew. I'm sure I would have known if I was still doing MacFixit back in the day, but as someone who's now retired, I wasn't paying as much attention. And you can tell me whether you know. It turns out that in the current system, that the system files and your data, as well as a few other things besides your data, but the basic system files and your data are in two separate volumes, and they are designed to look like they're one volume. On your Mac, and so you can't see any difference when you upgrade to Catalina. It looks pretty much the same as Mojave, but it's a dramatic difference in what's going on behind the scenes. In that there are now actually two separate volumes that get linked through this thing that Apple invented called firm links, and makes it look that way. And the reason, of course, is security from Apple's point of view. The system volume is now read-only. And so you can't make any change. You can't delete something. You can't add something. You can't modify something. Those system files are protected. Some of them, as according to what I was later reading, are even invisible. You can't even find out that they're there. Most of them you can, but you can't modify them anyway. Whereas opposed to that, the data section, which includes all your personal data, as well as some applications and related stuff that are dynamic and need to be modified on some regular basis, preference files and so on, are in the data file. And that, of course, as you can imagine, introduced new issues for backing up. If you want to make a mirrored exact duplicate that mimics that in every way, you have to understand all the nuances that Apple introduced, some of which aren't even documented, so that your mirrored backup is exactly as the startup volume. And it turned out that if you have an encrypted volume, that introduced even more hassles, where you couldn't even directly back up an encrypted volume without first unencrypting it at least once. And so I thought that was kind of interesting to learn about. And I decided that I'm going to hold off on Catalina a little bit longer until I'm sure that all those issues are resolved and SuperDuper is out with a non-beta version. So
I did know that. I knew some of that. I've been listening to different podcasts, reading, the articles we all read, trying to fully appreciate it. And you're right. As I understand it, the system files are locked for security and stability and all those good things. I'm not
sorry to interrupt you, but not just locked, but actually on a separate volume locked,
right,
as opposed to just on the same volume, but somehow magically locked.
Right. And I'm one thing, a question I've had that I just haven't had time to really do some research on is, we're in Catalina, or excuse me, in Mojave and prior systems, we're used to having that recovery volume that you can boot into.
Mm.
I assume that's still there. I'm not sure exactly how that fits in or whether that you're actually booting into the system volume in a different way. So,
I assume it's still there. I haven't actually tried the recovery volume beyond Mojave, but I assume it's. I haven't read that has disappeared, and I'd be surprised if it has. So.
yeah. It's a whole new world, and I guess the great thing is that you and I are interested in it, and a lot of our friends here are listening, are interested in it. But to the end user, it's pretty seamless, and they'll almost never, if they ever, see that second volume or the fact that the two are separated.
Well, and as long as you bring that up, that's another one of the issues about Macs that I was going to raise, which is exactly that. That my view is that Macs have gotten more and more stable over the years. It's one of the big things I think that until you take the look back, long view, you might not appreciate. I remember back in the 80s and 90s where troubleshooting meant all sorts of things going wrong on a regular basis. Your Mac crashed. You got, as the name of my book years ago indicated, you had sad Macs appearing on your screen, bomb icons appearing on your screen. You had to deal with disk first aid and running it. You had to worry about resetting your parameter RAM. You had to worry about repartitioning your hard drive and reformatting your hard drive under certain circumstances, and on and on and on, with all sorts of things that were beyond beyond just there's a bug in the software that you're going to have to wait for Apple to come out with the next update to fix, but other much more serious problems that would go wrong because the hardware would have problems, or the software or the firmware would have problems, and so on. Almost none of that happens anymore. It does. I wouldn't say it never happens, but really, people can go. In fact, just from my own use as an example, neither me nor anyone that has asked me for help in the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years has it actually been one of those sort of troubleshooting problems. With one, I can think of one exception actually, but in almost every other case, no. It's something. Usually, it's a problem where they don't understand how something works, and there's nothing wrong at all. Occasionally, something has gone wrong that requires because of some software bug or they did something wrong. But the hardware has become remarkably stable, and you don't even, and back when I was just back in the days when I was doing troubleshooting, I had a whole chapter of one of my books on understanding Unix for non-Unix experts, so that you could do all the necessary fixes in Unix that you would need to do to do more detailed troubleshooting. I don't think very few people, if any, will ever need to go into Unix again just to do basic troubleshooting. It's become irrelevant for all but the most dedicated Unix people. So that's a big change.
Yeah, we need to spend more time on this because I really like your perspectives. There are plenty of people out there that are complaining about Apple software and Apple stability, and I think that I don't want to just say that they're whining a little too much, but I think they need just to have a little bit better perspective on the sophistication of today's software compared to the way it used to be the time that you're talking about, when the software was not as sophisticated and it was buggy, and there were challenges. Well, not buggy, but there were challenges that you just outlined very well. Now it's much more sophisticated, and we don't have nearly the challenges. And it is getting better and better and better. And so, and iOS represents another jump forward because admittedly, there's not much we can do as end users, but we really don't have to either. It just works. So.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about Apple, and I agree with you, the one thing I will say about all the new Catalina way of doing things is it for people who have a history of wanting to be able to tinker with their Mac and feel Well, let me back up. I remember there was a time when iPhones first came out and iOS software first came out, and one of the complaints was the iOS software is much more restricted in access. That you can't get into the system folder of iOS the way you could get into the system folder of a Mac. You can't tinker. You can't make system level modifications. The system extensions that people used to make for Macs can't exist in iOS because there's no way that a third party could do that. And people complained that was a bad thing about the iPhone, at least initially. And it led to the whole thing about jailbreaking your iPhone and doing other things like that. And in some ways, what Apple is doing is to the Mac is more reminiscent of the iPhone. They now have walled off the system software. You can still see it, but you can't do much with it anymore. And all that tinkering possibility is pretty much gone. But the trade-off is you're getting a much more stable system and a more secure system from people who might want to do harm to your software. Overall, I think things have advanced enough that I'm okay with that. I think it's the days of wanting to tinker with my Mac like I was whatever. Back in the days when you built your own computers, just about those days are over. And I no more care as much. Maybe it's because I'm just getting older too. But I no more care as much about that level of tinkering as I do about tinkering with the insides of my television or something like that. It's just a different level of thing. So.
Well, and it also, we keep on and on, but I feel obligated to make this point. It also has allowed Apple to reach whole new markets because they weren't building it for the hobbyist or the IT person or the tech expert. They were building it for people that wanted to do things with it, and they didn't feel the need to understand what's going on under the hood. They didn't need to get into the carburetor or the cylinders or anything else. They just needed the steering wheel, the gas pedal, and the brake, and that was it.
Right.
So.
Most people who buy a car these days, it's a good example, because I think most people who buy a car these days care more about the color of the paint and the software on the screen than how the car drives, because they all drive fairly similarly. So,
yeah. Well, we will get something rescheduled, and we'll dig into the Mac part a little more, and then we'll cover some of the other things we were going to cover, and we won't tell anybody what they were. We'll just tease them with that.
Yeah, it'd be a secret.
But yeah. But Ted, thanks so much. Really, really appreciate it. It's great to see you.
Thank you, as always.
All right. Give Naomi my best, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye.
Folks, I'm Chuck Joyner. This is MacVoices. Hope you got something out of this. This was a little bit different than our normal fare, but I know Ted's obviously passionate about it. I'm passionate about it, maybe to a little lesser extent. If you're buying home theater, maybe it gave you some things to think about. Until the next time, and as always, thanks for watching. Visit MacVoices.com for show notes and to connect with Chuck on social media. Get involved in our Facebook group or like our Facebook page, and get more out of your Apple tech with MacVoices Magazine, free on Flipboard and on the web. And if you find value in it all, consider supporting us through either our Patreon campaign at patreon.com/MacVoices or by making a one-time donation via the PayPal link on our front page and in the show notes of each episode. You will join these fine people who help bring you Mac Voices. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media at backbeatmedia.com. Bandwidth provided by CashFly at cashfly.com.